Mark Normand on Kevin Hart, Jerry Seinfeld, Dave Chappelle, and getting jumped in NYC Club Shay Shay. What drives a young comic to turn chaos, awkward encounters, and personal struggles into a career that makes millions laugh? Comedy is more than laughter. For many who rise in this field, it is forged in hardship, shaped by absurdity, and fueled by an unrelenting desire to find humor in life's most raw moments. In a revealing interview on Club Shay Shay with host Shannon Sharpe, stand-up comedian Mark Normand takes viewers on a journey through his improbable life, from a chaotic childhood in New Orleans to the unforgiving streets of New York City and onto the stages where comedy legends loom large. What emerges from this candid conversation is not just the story of a comedian, but an odyssey of grit, passion, self-reflection, and growth. Normand's narrative is as unpredictable as his rapid-fire jokes, yet grounded in a sincerity that offers rare insight into what it truly takes to make it in stand-up comedy. Normand's story begins far from the well-lit comedy clubs of New York or Los Angeles. Born in New Orleans, Louisiana, he grew up in an environment that was, in his own words, wild and unconventional. He was part of a white family living in a predominantly black neighborhood, inside a crumbling mansion that his father had bought on a whim. From constant break-ins to stolen bikes and unexpected neighborhood characters, life early on was unpredictable. One figure in particular, a cross-dressing black man named Ennis, who served as his nanny, left a profound impact on him. Tougher than most adults Normand encountered, Ennis taught him to read people quickly and react with both humor and respect, long before he ever stepped on a comedy stage. It was this early exposure to raw, real-world interaction that would later inform Normand's observational comedy style. His family eventually escaped this early chaos after a terrifying home invasion in which his parents were tied up at gunpoint, an event that forced his family to leave the neighborhood and shaped his sense of vulnerability and survival. Normand's early years weren't easy, but they gave him a lifelong advantage, an ability to find humor in the unpredictable and to respond to life's absurdities with wit, a key ingredient for any stand-up comic. Ambition pulled Normand northward. Like many aspiring comedians, he chose New York City as the proving ground for his craft. The city's grueling open mic scene and relentless competition forced comedians to sharpen their material night after night, and few places are as iconic as the Comedy Cellar, often called the Harvard of comedy clubs, where legends perform and young comics learn by fire. Normand's early years in New York were a blend of struggle and lessons learned. It was in this crucible of late-night sets and tough crowds that he developed his signature rapid-fire punchline delivery, a style he describes in the interview as something that took years to refine. But his time in the city wasn't only about refining his jokes, it was also about real-world survival. In his first year, Normand recounts being jumped 3 separate times, including a moment where an older man in Crown Heights body slammed him, only for a group of bystanders to unexpectedly intervene. These intense experiences didn't break him. They hardened his resolve, teaching him resilience and an ability to maintain humor even when life didn't feel funny. These gritty street encounters weren't merely physical altercations, they were part of his education, forcing him to confront fear, stay mentally agile, and emerge with material that would only deepen as he matured both as a person and a performer. When people talk about great comedians, names like George Carlin, Jerry Seinfeld, and Richard Pryor often surface, and they influenced Normand deeply. In his interview with Shannon Sharpe, Normand highlights how these artists shaped his sense of timing, observational precision, and ability to build jokes that resonate with truth. Jerry Seinfeld, in particular, has been a major point of inspiration. Known for his observational comedy and ability to turn everyday minutiae into comedic art, Seinfeld's influence on Normand's work is clear, just as Normand once shared publicly that Seinfeld referred to him as one of the best up-and-coming comics, a validation that elevated his confidence within the industry. Normand's comedic philosophy is rooted in relentless work. He speaks openly about how stand-up isn't instantaneous success, it's craft perfected over countless nights in clubs, refining, failing, and evolving until every joke feels like it was born of experience. One of the most memorable segments of the interview involves Kevin Hart, but not in a way most audiences expect. Norman admits that for a while he ended every set by joking, "Thank you. I'm Kevin Hart." A playful identity he adopted early in his career when his own name didn't yet register with audiences. This bit, at once absurd and self-deprecating, became a staple of his act. It stemmed from his early gigging days when he felt invisible, undeserving, or overlooked, and it evolved into an inside joke within the comedy community that connected him to fans and fellow entertainers alike. Norman even recounts the surreal moment of performing it in front of the real Kevin Hart, a full-circle moment that affirmed how far he'd come. What began as a humorous coping mechanism became a signature component of his stage presence, illustrating how comedians often forge their identities through experimentation, unexpected connections, and a willingness to poke fun at themselves. Comedy is deeply personal, and Norman doesn't shy away from sharing the messier parts of his life. In the interview, he opens up about relationships, including a long-term high school romance that faded as he chased his comedy dreams. He recounts a story where a past girlfriend once showed up to one of his shows accompanied by another man, only to message him later a moment that blends humor with heartbreak. Norman and Sharpe also dive into modern dating culture, discussing apps, preferences, and the often humorous yet frustrating dynamics between men and women. These candid, sometimes awkward conversations reveal how Norman's comedy draws from lived experience, not just punchlines, but vulnerabilities, self-reflection, and the universal struggle to connect. He also touches on topics that many might consider taboo or uncomfortable, from past drinking habits to personal insecurities, all delivered with a candidness that underscores his belief. Comedy is most powerful when it speaks truth with unfiltered honesty. The Club Shay Shay conversation doesn't limit itself to personal anecdotes. Norman and Sharpe explore broader cultural issues, from cancel culture to racial politics, current events that set social discourse ablaze, and how stand-up comedy fits into these larger debates. Norman's stance isn't preachy or didactic. Instead, it reflects how comedians must constantly balance humor with sensitivity, observation with respect, and courage with awareness. He emphasizes that comedy can be a lens through which society examines itself, often revealing stories or perspectives that mainstream media overlooks or oversimplifies. This segment of the conversation reveals a deeper layer to Norman's craft, that beneath the laughter lies a thoughtful observer wrestling with how comedy intersects with modern culture and human complexity. Near the end of the interview, Norman talks about Dave Chappelle not just as a contemporary, but as a standard-bearer in stand-up comedy. Norman describes a night spent at Chappelle's Club in Ohio, where he witnessed firsthand the ease with which Chappelle commands a room, a quality Norman calls oratory mastery and one of the highest forms of comedic expression. Chappelle's influence on the generation of comedians that came after him is undeniable. Known for tackling thorny cultural and social issues with fearless clarity, Chappelle's work, including his controversial Netflix specials, has redefined what it means to use comedy as both art and commentary. By sharing his influences, his setbacks, and his boldest comedic choices, Norman invites audiences into an understanding of comedy, not simply as jokes or punchlines, but as a deeply human expression, one that reflects life's messiest truths and reminds us that sometimes the only way to survive is to find the humor in it all. If you love diving into Mark Norman's wild journey, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're uncovering the untold stories behind comedy legends, chaos, and the grind that shapes them.